My name is John, and I'm 68 years old. I live in a small, quiet town in Ohio where everyone knows everyone, and life flows steadily, like a river slowly carrying its waters. Until recently, I thought my life was as predictable and calm as this town. A retired engineer, I spent most of my life working in a factory, and then, after retiring, found solace in my small auto repair shop, which was always more of a hobby than a business. My house, modest but cozy, was paid off decades ago, brick by brick, with sweat and blood. I had savings, not astronomical, but enough to feel secure in my old age. All of this was the fruit of my life, my labors, and, of course, the love of my late wife, Mary. 5 years ago, Mary passed away. It was a blow I haven't fully recovered from. She was my anchor, my compass, my everything. After her death, like many widowers, I felt lost. My life, which used to be filled with her laughter and warmth, suddenly became empty. The only thing keeping me afloat were my children, my daughter Emily, who is now 42, and my son Michael, who is 38. I always tried to be a support for them, especially after their mother was gone. My life revolved around them, their well-being, their future. I wanted them to be happy, to have everything I didn't have in my childhood. I dreamed that our family would remain united, despite losing Mary. It seemed to me that this was her last wish, her unspoken request. Emily was always special. From childhood she was bright, ambitious, always striving for more. She was my little princess, my pride. I remember how, even as a little girl, she told me she wanted to conquer the world, and she really tried. After college, she moved to Chicago, to the big city where, as she said, there were opportunities for people like her. We were always close, especially when she was little. She often sat on my lap, listening to my stories about work, about how I built our house. I always thought that bond would stay with us forever, unbreakable. Michael, on the other hand, was always calmer, more down to earth. He stayed in our town, worked with me at the shop, helped around the house. He wasn't as ambitious as Emily, but I loved him for his reliability, for his quiet presence. He was my loyal companion, my helper. I thought he understood me without words, that he shared my values. I always believed that family is the most important thing, that no money, no material possessions are worth destroying family ties. I taught this to my children, showed them by example that honesty, integrity, and love are paramount, and I sincerely believed they had learned that lesson. But life, as it turns out, loves to throw surprises, especially when you least expect them. And sometimes those surprises come in the form of the people closest to you. I never could have imagined that my own daughter, my Emily, whom I adored, would turn away from me. Turn away because of what she believed was rightfully hers, because of an inheritance. What would you do if your children, the ones you lived for, the ones you sacrificed everything for, turned their backs on you because of money? Could you forgive them? Or would you fight for what you believe is right, even if it meant losing what you hold most dear? These are the questions that have haunted me for months, and I want to tell you my story so you can decide for yourselves who is right and who is wrong. My childhood was far from cloudless. I grew up in a working-class family in a small town in the Midwest. My father worked in a steel mill, my mother was a seamstress in a factory. We lived modestly, from paycheck to paycheck, and every cent counted. I remember how cold it was in our house in winter, that we slept in several sweaters, and breakfast was often just oatmeal. But even in that poverty, my parents taught me the main thing: hard work and honesty. They always said that the only path to a decent life was hard work and faith in yourself. No one would give you anything for free. And I learned that for life. I saw how they struggled, how every day they got up before dawn to earn a living for us, and I was proud of them, proud that they never complained, never gave up. I built my own life, brick by brick, After school, I joined the Army, served, and then went to study engineering. It wasn't easy. I had to work nights to pay for my studies, but I knew what I was doing it for. I wanted to build my own family, to give my children what I didn't have, and I wanted them to know the value of hard work, to understand that everything they had was the result of someone's efforts. My wife, Mary, was the light of my life. We met at a dance at the local club when I was 20 and she was 19. She was so cheerful, so sincere. I fell in love with her at first sight. We got married a year later, and it was the best decision of my life. Mary was my support, my best friend. We dreamed together about the future, about children, about our home. We saved every cent, denying ourselves a lot, to build our nest. I worked overtime at the factory, and Mary worked part-time at the local library. We believed it would all pay off, and it did. We bought our house. Then I opened my small auto repair shop, which became an outlet for me after hard work. We always taught our children to be grateful for what they had. We weren't rich, but we had everything we needed, and most importantly, we had love. We often told Emily and Michael that money wasn't the most important thing, that it was much more important to be a good person, to be honest and kind. We wanted them to understand that true wealth isn't what's in the bank, but what's in your heart. But I must admit that Emily was different from a young age. She always dreamed of something more than our small town could offer. She flipped through fashion magazines, watched movies about rich lives, and said that when she grew up, she would live in a big house with a swimming pool. I didn't pay much attention to it then, thinking they were just childish dreams. But now, looking back, I realize that these dreams were deeply rooted in her. She always strived for a luxurious life, for success that was measured not only by achievements, but also by material wealth. I remember our family holidays, Christmas, when Mary baked her famous gingerbread cookies, and we all decorated the tree together, listening to old Christmas songs. Trips to the lake every summer, where we fished, swam, and roasted marshmallows over. These moments were filled with laughter, warmth, and serene happiness. Now, when I remember them, it hurts. It hurts that these memories are overshadowed by the rift with my daughter. I look at old photos where we're all smiling, where Emily is sitting on my shoulders, and I can't understand how we got to this point. How could money destroy what seemed unbreakable? Isn't that the meaning of life? To create something, to leave behind not only material goods, but also a strong, loving family? I always believed that would be the case. When Mary passed away, I knew I needed to get my affairs in order. We had always been practical people, and the topic of inheritance wasn't taboo for us. On the contrary, we often discussed what we would leave our children, how we would take care of them after we were gone. My inheritance, to be honest, wasn't vast, but it was everything I had accumulated in my life, the fruit of every day of hard work. We had our house, our cozy home in Ohio, which we bought 40 years ago. It was currently valued at about $300,000. Not a mansion, but a sturdy, reliable home where our children grew up, where we spent so many happy years. In addition, there was my auto repair shop. It was a small business that brought in a modest but steady income. I opened it 20 years ago, and it became my second home. I spent most of my time there, fixing old cars, chatting with the locals. It was a place where I felt needed, and, of course, I had my savings, about $150,000. This money was our safety net, what we had put aside for old age, for unforeseen expenses. Altogether, it amounted to about $500,000. To me, it was a fortune, the result of my entire life. I always wanted to divide the assets fairly between Emily and Michael. Fairness, to me, didn't just mean equally, but taking into account their life circumstances. Emily was successful. She had built a career in Chicago, had a good income, and lived in an expensive apartment. Michael, on the other hand, stayed in our town, working with me at the shop. His life was less stable. He didn't have the same savings as Emily. It seemed logical to me that Michael, who stayed close and helped me, needed more support. I thought he could continue my business, develop the workshop. Mary and I often talked about this. She was always so wise. I remember her telling me once, "John, the main thing is for the children to be happy, but don't forget about those in need either. If we have something left, give a part to charity." In her will, which we drafted together, it was clearly stated that a portion of the funds should go to the local church and a veterans' shelter. Mary was always a very devout and compassionate woman. She believed in sharing with those less fortunate, and I, of course, intended to fulfill her wishes. I can't say that the conflict came out of nowhere. There were warning signs that I, perhaps, didn't want to notice. After Mary's death, Emily started calling more often, and not just to ask how I was doing. Her questions became more specific. "Dad, what about the house? Did you put it in someone's name?" Or, "How much savings did you have? Mom said you saved a lot." At first I attributed it to her concern for me, for my future, but then I started to notice something else in her voice. Not concern, but rather impatience. Expectation. She started coming more often, looking around the house as if evaluating it. This worried me, but I pushed those thoughts away, not wanting to believe that my daughter could be like that. I always thought our family was a fortress, that we could overcome any difficulties together, but it turned out that even the strongest walls can crumble if a crack appears in them, caused by greed. I couldn't imagine that this crack would appear between me and my daughter. Isn't it natural for a parent to want to provide for their children while also upholding their principles and fulfilling the wishes of their deceased wife? I thought I was doing the right thing. But apparently Emily saw it differently. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. It was a typical Sunday dinner, one of those we tried to have together at least once a month. Emily had come from Chicago. Michael, as always, was there. I had cooked my famous meatloaf. Mary always loved it. The usual atmosphere reigned at the table. We discussed news, work, plans. I felt relatively calm, although tension was building inside me. I knew I had to talk to them about the will. I had put off this conversation for too long, but I felt it was time. After dinner, as we were having coffee in the living room, I gathered my courage. "Kids," I began, "I'd like to talk to you about the future. You know, after your mother passed, I've been thinking a lot about how best to manage what we have. I've drawn up a will, and I'd like to discuss it with you." I explained my plan to them. "The house and savings," I said, looking from Emily to Michael, "I propose to divide equally between you. That would be $150,000 each, plus half the value of the house. But the auto repair shop, I'd like to leave it to Michael. He's been working there with me for years, knows it inside and out. It's his future, his business. I think that would be fair, considering Michael stayed here and helps me." I expected Emily might be a little displeased, but I never anticipated the reaction that followed. She sharply put her cup down on the table, spilling coffee. Her face instantly changed, becoming hard. "Dad, are you serious?" Her voice was full of indignation, almost contempt. "The auto repair shop? Are you serious? Do you know how much it's worth? It's much more than my share. Are you blind? You always loved Michael more. I knew it." My words caught in my throat. I was shocked. This wasn't my Emily, not the little girl who used to sit on my lap. "Emily, that's not true," I tried to explain. "I just want to be fair. Michael is here. He works at the shop. It's his calling. You don't need an auto repair shop in Chicago. You have your own successful career." "I need my share," she interrupted, her voice growing louder. "I demand you sell everything, the house, the shop, everything, and divide the money equally. Otherwise, it's unfair." It's favoritism. You always favored him." I couldn't believe my ears. Favoritism? Me? I, who paid for her expensive college, who supported her in all her endeavors, who was proud of her every success. I, who always tried to give them everything I could. I remembered her, still so small, running around the yard, how I taught her to ride a bike, how we built tree houses together. Did none of that mean anything? Did it all come down to money? Michael sat silently, eyes downcast. He was always like that, avoiding conflict. I waited for him to say something, to support me, to explain to Emily, but he remained silent. "I'm not going to sell the shop, Emily," I said, trying to stay calm, though inside I was boiling. "It's my life's work, and I want it to stay in the family, and I believe it's fair." "Fair?" She laughed bitterly, almost hysterically. "You talk about fairness? You just want to leave everything to your favorite son. I knew you were just like all those greedy old men." Those words hit me harder than any physical blow. Greedy old man. My own daughter called me a greedy old man. She stood up, her eyes burning with anger. "I'm not going to tolerate this. I won't talk to you until you change your mind." With those words, she turned and, slamming the door, walked out of the house. I heard her car pull away sharply and speed off. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. Michael finally looked up. "Dad, maybe she's just tired. She needs time to cool off." But I knew it wasn't just tiredness. It was something more. It was the beginning of the end. How would you feel if your child, whom you loved more than life itself, accused you of such injustice? Isn't it hard to stay calm when you're hurt like that? After that dinner, I tried to contact Emily. I called her every day, left messages on her answering machine, sent emails, even mailed a few regular letters, hoping she would read them and understand. In every message, I tried to explain my position, told her how much I loved her, how much I missed her. I begged her to talk, to sort things out. But in response, silence. Complete, deafening silence. She ignored me. My calls went unanswered, my letters unacknowledged. It seemed she had simply erased me from her life. Michael, who still lived nearby, would sometimes visit me. He tried to remain neutral, but I could see how difficult it was for him. He told me that Emily had called him, complaining about me, saying that I had shortchanged her, that I was unfair, that I had always loved him more. He tried to defend me, but Emily wouldn't listen. She was convinced of her righteousness, and no arguments could sway her. One morning I received a letter, not from Emily, but from a lawyer. When I saw the envelope with the unfamiliar law firm logo, my heart sank. I knew it wasn't good news. Inside was an official letter, written in dry, legalistic language. Emily, through her attorney, was giving me an ultimatum. She demanded that I sell the house and the business to divide the money equally. Otherwise, she threatened legal action. The letter stated that she considered me incapable of making decisions about the inheritance, that I was under Michael's influence, and that my decision was a clear act of favoritism and discrimination. I reread those lines several times, unable to believe my eyes. My own daughter, my Emily, was suing me, accusing me of incapacity. This wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. I felt anger rising within me, mixed with a deep, piercing pain. How could she do this? How could she sink so low? This news completely fractured our already fragile family. Michael tried to mediate, but Emily wouldn't compromise. She was unyielding. I began to notice that Michael, too, was starting to doubt my decision. He didn't say it directly, but I saw uncertainty in his eyes. He asked, "Dad, maybe it's worth selling the shop after all? Maybe it would be simpler?" I felt like I was losing him, too. The family I had so carefully preserved after Mary's death was crumbling before my eyes. Internal conflict tore me apart. I sat in my living room, looking at old photographs of Emily as a small, carefree girl. I remembered how she always wanted more than I could give. She dreamed of expensive toys, fashionable clothes, travel. I always tried to give her everything within my power. I paid for her expensive college, even though it was a huge strain on our budget. I bought her what she wanted, even if it meant I had to economize on myself. Did I raise this greed in her myself? Was I too soft? Or, conversely, too strict when I tried to teach her to appreciate what she had? I remembered Mary always saying, "John, the most important thing is for our children to be happy. But happiness isn't just about money." I always believed that, but now I saw how money was destroying everything we had built. I felt cornered, betrayed, lonely. Isn't it terrible when your own child threatens to sue you over money? And what would you do if you found yourself in such a situation? Would you give in or fight for your principles? After I received the letter from Emily's lawyer, I plunged into memories. I tried to understand where I had gone wrong, what had led to such a rupture. My thoughts constantly returned to Emily's childhood. She was my pride, my little star. From a very young age, she showed extraordinary intelligence and determination. I remember how, even as a tiny tot, she would sit at the table trying to read books that were clearly beyond her age. She was always top of her class, always striving for knowledge, for new achievements. I remember when she won the spelling bee in 5th grade, and I was so proud I almost burst. Mary and I sat in the front row, and when her name was announced, I jumped up and applauded so loudly that everyone looked at me. She was so happy, her eyes shining. She always wanted to be the best, and I encouraged her in every way. I paid for her extra lessons, bought her books, took her to museums. I wanted her to have every opportunity I didn't have. When it was time for college, Emily chose a prestigious university in Chicago. It was expensive, very expensive, but I couldn't deny her. I took out a loan, used some of our savings that Mary and I had put aside for our old age. I wanted her to get the best education so she could fulfill her dreams. I remember Mary and I seeing her off to Chicago. She was so excited, so full of hope. I hugged her tight and said, "Emily, go after your dream. We'll always be here for you." After moving to Chicago, Emily began to drift away. At first, it was imperceptible. Calls became less frequent, visits shorter. She started living a different life, a life that was far from our quiet town. She talked about her new friends, about parties, about expensive restaurants. I felt that she was changing, that she was becoming part of another world. But I didn't judge her. I thought it was natural for children to grow up and leave the nest. She still came for holidays, for Christmas, for Thanksgiving. But even then, I felt an invisible wall growing between us. She became more reserved, more closed off. I often compared Emily to Michael. Michael stayed in our hometown. He didn't strive for great success, didn't dream of a luxurious life. He was content with what he had. He worked with me at the shop, helped me around the house. He was reliable, predictable. And this comparison only intensified my dilemma in distributing the inheritance. Emily, who seemed to already have everything, demanded more. Michael, who was less well off, was ready to accept any decision I made. I miss the former closeness with my daughter. I miss her laughter, her hugs, our long conversations. I blame myself for her estrangement. Maybe I worked too much? Maybe I didn't give her enough attention? Or, conversely, maybe I spoiled her too much, and she got used to getting everything she wanted? These questions torment me every night. I look at her childhood photos where she's smiling, and I can't understand how that smile could turn into such a cold, calculating grimace. I remember once, when Emily was about 10, she came to me with a scraped knee. She was crying, not from pain, but from obida, resentment, because her friend wouldn't share a toy with her. I hugged her and said, "Emily, the most important thing isn't toys, it's friendship. Money comes and goes, but people remain." She nodded then, and I thought she understood. But apparently I was wrong. Isn't it hard to see your child, whom you loved so much and invested so much in, drift away from you? And what would you do to regain that closeness? Emily's threats were not empty words. A few weeks after that ultimatum, I received an official notice from the court. Emily had filed a lawsuit. She demanded a review of my will and the sale of all assets, the house, the workshop, the savings. The lawsuit claimed that I was incapable of making rational decisions, that I was under Michael's influence, and that my inheritance decision was unfair and violated her rights. I felt betrayed to the core. This was not just a disagreement. It was a full-blown war. My own daughter, the one I lived for, now saw me as an enemy, but I decided not to give up. I couldn't let her destroy everything I had built my whole life and violate Mary's will. I started looking for a lawyer. It was expensive, very expensive. My savings, which I had so carefully accumulated, began to dwindle before my eyes. But I knew I had no choice. I had to fight. This lawsuit completely fractured our already fragile family. Michael, poor guy, tried to reconcile us. He called Emily, begged her to reconsider, offered to talk to me without lawyers, but she was unyielding. "Michael, it's his own fault. He always favored you. I'm not backing down," she yelled into the phone. I learned that Emily was spreading rumors among our relatives, among old friends. She said I was a greedy old man who was trying to cheat his daughter, that I was out of my mind and didn't know what I was doing. Some relatives, to my horror, believed her. They stopped calling, avoiding me on the street. I felt like an outcast. My feeling of loneliness became unbearable. I sat in my house, in silence, and the only sounds were the ticking of the old clock and my own thoughts. I remembered how Mary always said that family was the most important thing, and now my family was destroyed. My daughter, whom I loved more than life, now saw me as an enemy. She was ready to trample me to get the money. I couldn't understand how Emily could have changed so much. She had always been so kind, so loving. Can money really change a person so much? Can it make them forget about love, about family ties, about gratitude? I looked at old photographs of Emily, still so small, sitting on my shoulders, and tears welled up in my eyes. I remembered her laughing, hugging me, saying, "Daddy, you're the best." And now this same girl was suing me. The pain of betrayal was unbearable. I felt like I had been stabbed in the back. I always tried to be a good father, to give them everything I could, and this is what I got in return. I didn't wish her harm. I just wanted justice. But she saw it differently. She saw me as an obstacle to her wealth. How would you feel if your own child, whom you loved more than life, sued you? Isn't that the worst betrayal a parent can experience? After the lawsuit began, I started to reflect a lot. My thoughts constantly returned to the same question. What is more important, money or family? I always believed that family is the foundation upon which all of life is built. That family ties are the most valuable thing we have. But now I saw how money, that cursed money, was destroying everything I had built. I remembered stories of my friends who had faced similar situations. One old friend of mine, Bob, lost touch with his brother over a small plot of land their parents left them. Another, Frank, fell out with his children because they wanted to sell his house while he was still alive. I always listened to these stories with horror, thinking, that will never happen to me. My children aren't like that. How wrong I was. Sometimes I wondered, was I too strict in my decisions? Maybe I should have just sold everything and divided the money equally to avoid this conflict. But then I remembered Mary, her will, her words about taking care of Michael, about giving a portion to charity, and I realized that I couldn't abandon my principles. I couldn't betray her memory. I imagined what Mary would say if she saw all this. She would probably shake her head and say, "John, money is just paper, but family is forever." She would want me to fight for the family, not for money. She would want us all to be together, to love each other no matter what. She wouldn't want her children fighting over an inheritance. I felt guilty, guilty that I couldn't prevent this conflict, guilty that perhaps I myself fostered this greed in Emily, or, conversely, guilty that I couldn't understand her, couldn't see that she had problems she wasn't telling me about. I remembered how, even as a very young child, she always strived for more. Maybe I should have taught her to be more content with what she had. I sat in my living room where every object reminded me of Mary, of our life together. Her favorite armchair, the old radio we listened to jazz on in the evenings. All of it was filled with memories that now seemed so distant, so unreal. I felt lonelier than ever before, as if the whole world had turned its back on me. This conflict forced me to reevaluate my entire life. I always thought the most important thing was to provide for my children, to give them a good start in life. But it turned out that sometimes this can lead to the opposite result. Instead of uniting the family, the inheritance destroyed it. What is more important? To preserve the property you fought for your whole life, or the relationships with your children, which seem to be more precious than anything? And how do you find a balance between fairness and love when it comes to money? The first court hearing. I remember that day in every detail. The courtroom was cold and formal, the atmosphere tense. I sat next to my lawyer, Mr. Davis, an elderly but very experienced attorney recommended by friends. He looked confident, but I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Emily sat on the other side of the room, next to her lawyer, a young, aggressive woman who seemed ready to tear me apart. I looked at Emily, but she avoided my gaze. Her face was stony, without a single emotion. I couldn't believe that this woman sitting opposite me was my daughter, the same girl I carried in my arms when she was little, who fell asleep on my chest, listening to my bedtime stories. The judge, a stern, gray-haired man, began the proceedings. Emily's lawyer spoke first. She accused me of unfairly distributing the inheritance, claiming that I was trying to cheat Emily, that I was incapacitated and under Michael's influence. She spoke of some moral obligation of a parent to provide for all children equally, without taking into account their life circumstances. Her words were like knife thrusts to my heart. My lawyer, Mr. Davis, spoke in my defense. He calmly and reasonably explained to the court why I had made this decision. He told how I had built my life, how I had worked to provide for my family, how I had opened the workshop that became my life's work. He explained that my decision was based on fairness and concern for Michael, who had stayed in our town and helped me. He emphasized that I had always wanted the workshop to remain in the family, to continue to thrive. The most difficult moment was when Michael testified. He looked pale and bewildered. He tried to be neutral, saying he loved us both, that he didn't want to get involved in our conflict. He confirmed that he worked at the shop, but couldn't clearly state his position on its sale. His neutral stance further complicated the situation. I felt like I was losing both my children. Michael, who had always been my support, now seemed so distant, so foreign. I looked at Emily, at her cold, alienated face, and memories rushed through my mind. Her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding. I was always there, always supported her, and now she sat there as if I were a stranger to her, as if we had never been a family. It broke my heart. I felt the pain constricting my chest. The judge listened to both sides. He looked tired, as if he had seen hundreds of similar stories. At the end of the hearing, he postponed the decision, suggesting that the parties settle peacefully. "Family conflicts are the most complex," he said, "and it's best to resolve them outside of court." Think about what's more important." But Emily refused. Her lawyer stated that my daughter would not compromise until I agreed to sell everything. She was unyielding. I left the courtroom feeling drained. The battle for the inheritance continued, and I didn't know how much strength I had left. Isn't it hard to watch your family fall apart in a courtroom? And what would you do to stop this battle when one party refuses to compromise? The conflict with Emily and the lawsuit affected my life more deeply than I could have imagined. I felt isolated, as if I had been cut off from the world. Some relatives, believing the rumors Emily spread, stopped communicating with me. My sister, with whom I had always been close, stopped answering my calls. Old friends I used to play cards with on Fridays started avoiding me. I became withdrawn, stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. My auto repair shop, which used to be my sanctuary, now felt like a place where I was just serving time. The stress, the constant tension, the pain of betrayal, all of it took a toll on my health. I started having heart problems. The doctors said it was stress-related, that I needed to worry less. But how could I not worry when my own daughter was trying to take everything I had? I started thinking more often about my mortality. What would happen if I passed away? What would be left behind? More conflicts? More pain? Loneliness became my constant companion. I sat in my house, in silence, and the only sound was the ticking of the old clock. I missed Mary, her laughter, her warmth. I missed Emily, the Emily who was my little princess. I missed Michael, our conversations at the shop. It seemed that everything dear to me had vanished. To cope with this loneliness, I started looking for something to do. One day, I saw an ad in the local newspaper. Volunteers needed at the veterans' shelter. I decided to give it a try. I had always respected veterans, their sacrifice, and it seemed to me that there I could find some meaning, some purpose. At first it was difficult. I was withdrawn, unsociable. But gradually I started to get used to it. I helped the veterans with their daily tasks, listened to their stories, played chess with them. And I realized that I wasn't alone, that there were people who had been through much more than me, yet still maintained their kindness and humanity. I saw how they supported each other, how they shared their memories, how they laughed despite all the hardships. Volunteering gave me new meaning. I felt needed, useful. I realized that life doesn't end with family conflicts, that there are other people who need my help, my attention, and that helped me start thinking about forgiveness. I began to ponder, should I forgive Emily, even if she doesn't apologize? Could I ever let go of this pain, this feeling of betrayal? I didn't know the answer, but I understood that if I didn't forgive, this resentment would poison my life until the very end. I didn't want to live with this burden on my soul. I wanted to let it go, to move forward. Isn't it hard to experience such loneliness and isolation? And what would you do to find new meaning in life after such a blow? I had almost resigned myself to the fact that Emily had permanently erased me from her life. Days dragged on, filled with routine and silence. The lawsuit continued, but I no longer harbored any particular illusions. I was just waiting for it all to end. And then, one day, as I was checking the mailbox, I saw an envelope. On it was a familiar handwriting that I hadn't seen in a very long time. Emily's handwriting. My heart stopped. I couldn't believe my eyes. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Not official, not from a lawyer, but a personal, handwritten letter. I began to read. Every word penetrated deep into my soul. Emily wrote that she was very sorry. She confessed that her actions were not driven by greed, but by desperation. She told me about her financial problems. It turned out that Emily's husband had invested all their savings in some unsuccessful business venture, and they had lost everything. They were heavily in debt. Their house was at risk. She was afraid to tell me, afraid to seem like a failure. She thought the inheritance was their only chance to get out of this hole. She wrote that she was ashamed, that she understood how much she had hurt me. As I read the letter, my emotions swung from anger to sympathy. Anger, because she had hidden her problems from me for so long, because she had taken such a drastic step without talking to me. Sympathy, because she found herself in such a difficult situation. I always wanted to help my children. I was always ready to support them. If she had just told me, I would have done everything possible to help her. I remembered Mary always saying, "John, never judge people until you know their story." And now Emily's story was revealed to me. She wasn't just a greedy daughter. She was a desperate person, cornered. This didn't justify her actions, but it explained them. I wanted to help her. My father's heart couldn't remain indifferent. But I didn't know how to rebuild trust. How could I believe again in someone who had hurt me so deeply? I sat over the letter, trying to find the right words for a reply. I wrote to her that I understood her pain, that I was ready to help, but that she should have talked to me sooner. I offered to meet her, to talk without lawyers, without resentment, just as father and daughter. A few days later, I received a short reply. Emily wrote that she wasn't ready to meet yet, that she needed time to think things over. This left the conflict open, but it gave me hope, hope that one day we could restore our relationship. This letter made me realize that I might not have known the whole truth about my daughter's life, that behind her ambition and desire for luxury lay fears and insecurity, that behind her aggression lay pain. Isn't it amazing how one letter can change everything? And what would you do if you learned such a truth about your child? Could you forgive, despite the pain you were caused? Emily's letter became a turning point for me. It didn't solve all the problems, but it gave me the understanding I so desperately needed. I decided not to sell the house and the workshop. This was my legacy, what I had built my whole life, and I couldn't give it up. But I also decided to allocate a portion of my savings, about $50,000, to help Emily if she agreed to reconciliation. It was my gesture of goodwill, my way of showing her that I still loved her and was willing to support her. This conflict taught me several important lessons. Firstly, I realized that money truly isn't worth family ties. No material possessions can replace the love, trust, and support of loved ones. I lost so much because of this dispute, and it taught me to value what truly matters. Secondly, I understood that forgiveness takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a long and difficult process, especially when the pain of betrayal is so deep. But I also realized that forgiveness is a necessary condition for my own peace. I didn't want to live with this resentment in my heart. I wanted to let it go, to move forward. Thirdly, I recognized the importance of communication and honesty within the family. If Emily had told me about her problems earlier, perhaps all of this could have been avoided. We must talk to each other, share our fears and difficulties, rather than hide them. Only then can we truly support each other. My volunteering at the Veterans Shelter became a real salvation for me. Interacting with these people, their stories, their resilience, all of it helped me cope with loneliness and find new meaning in life. I realized that even in the darkest times, there is light. There are people who are willing to lend a helping hand, and I am grateful for that. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if Emily will come back, but I hope that one day she will find the strength to come to me and we can start all over again. I will always love her, no matter what. My heart is open to her. I'm finishing my story, but the questions remain. What would you have done in my place? Could you forgive your child after such a betrayal? And what, in your opinion, is the most important thing in life, money or family? Share your thoughts in the comments. It's very important for me to know your opinion.